Good evening. My name is Malcolm Hunter. I am the President and Chief Executive Officer of Harlem Congregations for Community Improvement. You may know us by HCCI. I am happy to be here to participate in this evening's virtual town hall meeting, which is sponsored by New York University, Langone Medical Center, and HCCI, and our supporting organizations are the City University of New York School of Public Health. We have an esteemed panel of experts, medical experts, clinicians, and community activists and members to present to you tonight. And tonight's subject is COVID-19, the stage 3 vaccine process, testing, and education of our community around these issues. I am here joined with my co-moderator, Dr. Joan Dawson, who will present to you the panel that we have for this evening. Dr. Dawson?
Yes, good evening, everybody. I really do appreciate your support. Thank you for being here tonight. We at HCCI appreciate your efforts to continue to affect our community in outstanding ways. Our goal tonight is to arm you with information to enable you to guide your families, your friends, your neighbors, and your constituents effectively regarding this pandemic and what we're going through now. Before we start the program, I want to introduce a very special guest. I don't know if he has arrived yet. Is he there?
I don't see him, but we should introduce Judge Tingling.
We will, yes. All right, so while we're waiting on some of the other guests, I will take the time to introduce one of our our Honorable Judge Tingling, who is a retired judge, and he is now working as our city controller for the city of New York, and he is a friend of HCCI, who has worked with us on a number of issues. So we thank you for being here with us tonight. We thank you for what we know you will bring to the table to help our community. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dawson.
We're going to, our goal, as I said, is to provide the facts regarding the COVID vaccine. So we want to give you an opportunity, Judge Tingling, before I go any further, to if you have any concerns or any questions, anything that you would like to right now, from the list of questions you'd like to ask. I don't know if you've had time to look at the questions, but if there is some concern you have, Dr. Mulligan is here, and the other panel members who will be introduced as we go along.
Dr. Dawson, I do not at the moment. I'm looking forward to the questions being presented to the panel, and I'm going to be honored to participate at that time.
Thank you, Judge Tingling. Dr. Dawson, we're going to move on, and we have a lot to talk about. I'll give you a brief description on how the program will progress. Dr. Dawson will introduce Dr. Mark Mulligan, who's the principal investigator on behalf of NYU Langone Medical Center, who will give our panelists and our attendees a overview of the NYU stage 3 trials, an overview of what COVID-19 the virus is and what it isn't, and also give a general perspective from an expert, from his seat as an expert on where we are now and where we may be in the next few months of this process. After Dr. Mulligan's presentation, we'll introduce all of the panelists, and then we will have the panelists provide some of their perspective from their expertise as it relates to COVID-19. And then we'll have a half an hour of questions and answers from you, the audience, the attendees of this panel. We'll give you an ample amount of time to ask questions directly to Dr. Mulligan and the panel of experts. Dr. Dawson, if you're ready, we can introduce Dr. Mulligan at this time. Panelists should unmute themselves. Dr. Mulligan, why don't you start with your presentation, sir? Introduce yourself and what you're doing, what you're here for in your presentation.
Sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Punter. Thank you, Dr. Dawson and Judge Tingling. A pleasure to be here with you and all of the other panelists. I'm really looking forward to tonight, and to all of the listeners and viewers out there. I appreciate your tuning in to this, what I think will be a really wonderful event. I'm Mark Mulligan. I'm the director of the NYU Langone Vaccine Center. I'm a physician. I'm a scientist. I'm an infectious diseases trained doctor. I see patients and I do medical research. I have a laboratory for research and also a research clinic. So I look forward to sharing my slides now, and I'll do that. And we'll get into the talk about COVID-19 vaccines. Let me share my screen. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. Juanita, are you able to take care of that for me?
I will certainly try, and in the meantime, if you could give us some additional background.
Okay, great. So what I'd like to do is just continue talking for a minute, and Juanita's going to work on that. Okay, we got it, Juanita. Here we go. Let me get this up and going. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, Mark, we got it.
Okay, perfect. So what I'd like to do is talk for a bit about vaccine trials for COVID-19, and really look forward to the discussion, but I want to set the stage, provide some foundation. Let me make this little, 1 second. I've got to get out of the pointer for a second. And I'll make this little so it's not taking up my screen. There we go. Okay. So we are an NIH-funded, US government-funded vaccine and treatment evaluation unit. There are just 10 of these in the country. We're the only one in the city. There is one in Rochester. This is Dr. Fauci's institute, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, charged with doing vaccine research. There's a large federally funded group called the COVID Prevention Network, and we're a part of that as well. And these are some of the logos that we've created for our VTEU, or Vaccine and Treatment Evaluation Unit. And at the NYU Langone Vaccine Center, our mission is to protect and restore human health through innovative vaccine research and other infectious disease research, including treatments for infectious diseases. And, you know, community is essential, as it says on the slide. We recognize that as a clinical trials organization, a translational human investigation group, we have to interface with community, reach out to them, engage them, educate, seek their trust, and then invite their participation in our clinical trials. Everything in your medicine cabinet is there because someone stepped forward. All those prescription medicines, someone stepped forward to participate in clinical trials. We cannot make progress. We need study participants to develop new vaccines and new medicines, and especially a COVID-19 vaccine. But we recognize that in the community, there is a lot of fear. There's a lot of uncertainty in this time of staying at home for many people, or not being able to go out like we normally would. There's isolation. And there's been a lot of mistrust and misinformation, unfortunately. And so part of what we try to do in our education with the community is to offer strength, to offer optimism, solidarity, the power of collective effort, and to try to develop confidence in our scientific systems. As a scientist, I'm interested in the truth, and let the chips fall where they will. We need to know the truth. That's what science is all about. And we've had some amazing progress, and I'm going to talk about that. Let's start with a few fundamentals. How does a vaccine work? Well, it teaches the body to recognize and fight off invaders, like the novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2 it's called. So what happens when an infection occurs, or this could be a vaccine, the body recognizes it, sounds an alarm, and then the vaccine-induced fighter cells and proteins, the antibodies, for example, help stamp out the virus so that you don't get sick. What we hope to do, and what we now have a lot of evidence that we are doing with our vaccines, is to prevent illness, to prevent death, severe cases of COVID-19. And so the vaccine trains the immune system. You know, one way to think of it is the firefighter analogy. You wouldn't send a firefighter out to fight a fire without a lot of training and preparation. And it's the same way with our immune system. We train our immune system to fight a virus like COVID-19 through vaccination. It's a safe way to turn on the immune system to specifically look for that particular virus. And there are several platforms or types of COVID-19 vaccines that are being studied. For example, there's the RNA, which have gotten a lot of press in the last 3 weeks. This is the Pfizer vaccine, also the Moderna vaccine. The RNA is basically, you can think of it as a message to the cell. It's injected into the arm like any vaccine, your upper arm, and then the RNA is taken up into cells, and a little bit of the vaccine protein is made, the vaccine spike protein is made in the cells, and then you make an immune response. And it turns out that's highly protective. We now know that both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines protect 95% of people against COVID, from catching COVID, relative to the placebo group. So it's really an amazing result, just news in the last 2 to 3 weeks. Most vaccines are less protective than that. Our very best vaccines, our all-stars, are in the 90 percentile. So this is a home run for the first 2 vaccines out of the gate. It's pretty, unbelievable, to be honest. And of course, safety has been evaluated very carefully, and over 75,000 people have gotten the 2 RNA COVID vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, and they've had an excellent safety profile. Another type of vaccine that I'll mention tonight is the non-replicating, that means it doesn't even multiply in the body, viral vector, like an adenovirus. In this case, a single gene, again, the spike protein of the virus. So if this were a picture of COVID, on the surface, that red protein is the spike, and that's the main target for neutralizing antibodies. So in this case, another harmless common cold virus, adenovirus, it has a single spike gene inserted into it. It doesn't multiply in the body. It can't produce COVID, but you make T cells, B cells, and antibodies against the spike protein once this goes into the arm, and you make, again, the vaccine spike protein. It's another way to message the body to make the protein that we want. There's another category, the protein vaccines down here. This is kind of like the flu vaccine that many of us get every year. And instead of delivering a message, either RNA or within this viral vector, here you're just going ahead and giving the protein instead of the message to make the protein. And this is another type of vaccine that's not yet in phase 3 for COVID-19, but will be going into phase 3 in the near future. Sanofi is one example. Novavax is another example of these spike protein vaccines. Well, how do we study vaccines? We start with phase 1, as is shown here. And this usually involves tens of subjects, fewer than 100. And we ask, is it safe? We enroll very healthy, usually younger adults, and look for any safety signals. And we start to look at the antibodies and T cells that the vaccine produces. If a vaccine looks safe and produces a response in the immune system that we think might be protective in phase 1, then we go to phase 2. And now instead of tens of subjects, we enroll several hundred subjects. And again, we're looking at side effects, safety, and even more at the immune response in the body. If the vaccine still looks really good after phase 2, we go on to phase 3. And this is where we are now with many of the COVID vaccines, where we enroll thousands of participants. And now we're asking, does the vaccine protect? We've already established in phase 1, phase 2, that the vaccine is safe, that the vaccine is tolerated well, that it produces an immune response and antibody level neutralizing antibodies that we think might be protective. And now we want to know, does it protect? And this is called phase 3. When we do phase 3, we take half the participants usually, or it could be 2/3 of them, and give them the vaccine, the real thing, and the other 1/2 or 1/3, depending on the particular study, will get a placebo or a saltwater shot. And then we follow over time. We don't ever deliberately expose them to COVID, but it's community exposure just from living our lives the same way that every day in the United States right now, something like 160,000, it's unthinkable, 160,000 people are getting infected every day in this pandemic. And the FDA, after phase 3, will review if the company brings the vaccine to them for approval, and they'll look to be sure all the data suggests it's safe and effective and that the benefits outweigh the risks. And only then will the FDA approve a vaccine. Sometimes after a vaccine is approved, there are additional studies, and that's called phase 4. And we always monitor for vaccine adverse events, even after approval, to be sure that nothing has been missed. So there are a few key questions. One of them is, can vaccines cause COVID, the vaccine itself? And the answer is no. You don't have the whole virus there. So if the bicycle was the whole virus, as shown here, that's never in the vaccine. We might have the front tire or the handlebars or the chain. And really what I'm saying is what we have is the spike protein, but that's all. It's not the whole virus. It can't cause infection or COVID-19. Very important point. So when someone volunteers for a vaccine trial, and I have been a volunteer years ago in a vaccine trial for HIV, what can you expect? Well, for our COVID-19 studies, we will ask health-related questions, make sure that you fit the study criteria, you'll be educated about the study, you make a decision on whether you'd like to come into the study or not. You can withdraw from the study anytime you like, no questions asked. We're always available to answer questions. If you decide to go forward, you fill out the informed consent form, and then we vaccinate and we have follow-up visits. For the current trial we're doing, the AstraZeneca trial, 7 visits over 2 years. Most of these phase 3 trials are 2-year studies to study safety. And during the study, we'll monitor your safety closely. We'll collect blood samples. It's 2 shots with a 1-month interval in between the 2 shots. And we continue to monitor. And we ask our COVID-19 phase 3 trial participants every week to let us know, have you had any symptoms that could be COVID-19? And if the answer is yes, we invite you in for testing to see if you might have COVID. And that's what helps us sort out if the vaccine compared to the placebo, the saltwater shot, is providing protection. We do compensate our study participants for every visit. And again, as I mentioned, there are 7 visits for this study. And in general, the compensation ranges from $50 to $75 or $100 per visit. What does it mean when we say a vaccine is effective? Well, you know this, I think, from the phase 3 trials. It's basically saying, like when Pfizer came out with their first report on Monday, November 9th, their interim analysis, they compared in a 40,000 person study, 20,000 people who got vaccine, 20,000 who got placebo, And what they saw were 90 infections in the placebo group and only 4 infections in the vaccine group. It was an amazing result. And that, when you do the mathematics on that, is a 95% effective or protective. It means that you have 95% fewer cases of infection in a vaccine group of, let's say, 20,000 people, as compared to 20,000 people who didn't get the vaccine and had the same level of community exposure. So a vaccine that's effective is one that protects against COVID-19 disease. And that's what we're looking to do with our vaccines: reduce human suffering, preserve health, prevent death from COVID. Well, where are we now? Well, now we have 2 vaccines that have 95% protection, an amazing result. The Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. These are both the RNA messenger vaccines. Again, they message the cell to make the spike protein, and then you produce your antibodies, T cells, B cells, and results in very strong protection. These are home run levels of protection. It's really quite amazing. And then this Monday, we heard about the AstraZeneca result, and that vaccine is in 2 studies in the United Kingdom and in Brazil. If you average the results across the 2 studies, providing 70% protection. So again, a very effective result, a very strong result. We are currently enrolling at NYU in the AstraZeneca phase 3 trial. We're looking to enroll people that are at higher risk for exposure to the virus and those that are at higher risk for severe COVID-19 ending up in the hospital. And we know that that includes people with chronic conditions, racial and ethnic minorities who have been overly affected by COVID-19. It also includes older adults, and it includes people whose jobs put them at higher risk of exposure: medical workers, police, fire, essential workers, people who can't work from home behind their computer sitting in their living room, but have to go every day to work in the grocery store or in the bodega. So these are the people we're looking to enroll. And we have 5 clinics across New York City, 3 in Manhattan, Bellevue, the VA, and NYU Langone Tisch, right? All 3 right there on First Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. We're out in Mineola, Long Island, and also Sunset Park, Brooklyn, at the NYU hospitals there. I'm closing up now. A couple of other thoughts, and I look forward to what follows. I just wanted to mention that CDC has been charged with recommending which groups should receive the COVID vaccines. None yet have gotten the EUA or the approval from FDA, but the committee at FDA is meeting on December 10th. So within a few weeks, we likely will have some vaccines that have approval from FDA, but the supply will be limited. There won't be enough for everybody. And so they are going to be prioritized, and there'll be a recommendation from CDC on how those vaccines should be utilized given the limited supply. And these are some of the guiding principles that CDC has said they will use. They will seek in their recommendations to decrease death and serious disease as much as possible among Americans, to preserve the functioning of our society, to reduce the extra burden the disease is having on people already facing disparities, and to increase the chance for everyone to enjoy health and well-being. And I fully recognize, and this is why we're here tonight, that education, engagement, partnership, gaining trust of communities is essential, not only for participation in clinical trials, but for the upcoming rollout of the vaccines. As my dear friend Walt Orenstein says, vaccines don't save lives, vaccinations do. So having a vaccine that's 95% protective in a clinical trial is one thing, but getting communities to understand and appreciate and want to take the vaccine so that we can achieve herd immunity and defeat the pandemic is another thing. We did that for smallpox. Smallpox has been eradicated. This is the old New York City smallpox hospital. And how was smallpox defeated? Through a vaccine. This is out on Roosevelt Island. It's now a crumbling ruin because of a vaccine. So it's our privilege to do this work, and we hope to partner with all of you in defeating the pandemic. Thank you very much, Dr. Punter. Thank you very much, Dr. Dawson, and I look forward to the evening.
Thank you, Dr. Mulligan, for that insightful and detailed and expert explanation about the history of COVID-19, the interventions that NYU Medical Langone Center is performing, explaining the stage 3 trials, as well as giving us your perspective. At this time, I'm going to briefly identify our panelists so that the attendees, the audience, know who our experts are. And then I'm going to invite Juanita Erb, Ms. Juanita Erb, who is on the NYU team, to ask some clarifying questions. And then we'll proceed in order of our panelists to introduce themselves and also ask any clarifying questions. We'll do this for the next 30 minutes, and then the final 30 minutes will be for the audience. So I see some questions being posted already. Rest assured, we're going to answer your questions, and I'm speaking directly to the audience. So post your questions or reserve your questions for a presentation during the last half hour of this panel. The panelists that you have tonight are Dr. Aisha Langford, who is a researcher at NYU Medical, and also will tell you a little bit about why why this particular subject matter is important. I'll let her speak to that at the appropriate time. We also have a registered nurse and a master's in nursing, Ms. Tamia Davis, who is a frontline worker in the battle against COVID-19. You'll be formally introduced to her. We also invited our local assembly member, Reverend Alfred Taylor, who represents the 71st Assembly District, where Harlem Congregations happens to be located. And we also have the Honorable Judge Milton Tingling, who's a retired Supreme Court justice or judge in the County of New York, and he's also presently the New York County Clerk. He's actually the county clerk who is the administrator of all jury processes, both grand and pettit jury, and we'll get an introduction to him. And we also have on our panel, featured on our panel, Dr. Victoria Ingo from the City University of New York School of Public Health, but Dr. Ingo was not able to join us. So her colleague, Deborah Levine, who's a licensed clinical social worker, a community member, a long-standing community member in Harlem, and is also the director of the Harlem Strong Initiative at the City University of New York School of Public Health, who will stand in the panel on Dr. Ingo's behalf. So I invite, and also Ms. Juanita Erb, who's from NYU, and Ms. Erb will have the first question, clarifying question with Dr. Mulligan. Juanita?
Yes, thank you for having me. My name is Juanita Erb, and I'm the Clinical Research Operations Manager. Dr. Mulligan invited me to come and help with the clinic initiatives. I've been a clinical research nurse for approximately 10 years. I started with HIV/AIDS at the Adolescent AIDS Program in the Bronx, and am now working at the Vaccine Center. So Dr. Mulligan, one of the questions for clarification from your presentation is, do these vaccines, the recent data, does it show that it protects against disease, or does it protect just from developing more severe symptoms?
Thank you, Juanita. That's an important question. The trials are designed with what's called the primary endpoint, and all of the data that you're hearing in the news, the 95% protection, the 70% protection, is against COVID-19 disease that has been laboratory confirmed. So these are people that are sick, they have respiratory infection, it might be severe, it might also be moderate or even mild, and they've had a nasal swab, they've had an antigen test, or maybe even an antibody test, but usually the swab, which will say that be the laboratory confirmation. So it's laboratory confirmed, COVID disease.
Thank you. And the second question, which I think segues really well into our larger conversation here in community engagement, is can you share with us either some site-specific or even study-wide, nationwide statistics about the approximate number of Black participants, percentage-wise, and also Latinx and Hispanic participants?
Yeah, this is absolutely critical. And we actually had a call today with Dr. Fauci, and he drove this home for us, all of the investigators for the AstraZeneca trial. And I'll give you an example how important this is and how seriously the US government is taking this, and we as investigators are taking it. In the Moderna trial, which has now been shown to be 95% protective, they actually paused enrollments of Caucasians, of whites, because they weren't enrolling enough Black and brown, African Americans, Hispanics, American indigenous peoples, and they ended up doing very well. They made corrective actions. And why is this so important? It's so important because the groups most affected include racial and ethnic minorities. And so we absolutely want to be able to go to those communities when there's an available vaccine to offer them protection, but we need to have studied it in those communities so that we know that it's just as safe and just as protective. And so far, all the data suggests that that is true, that the vaccine is just as safe and protective in African Americans, in Latinx, and other minorities. You asked for percentage, Juanita. It's really quite good. We're in the range of 30 to 40% minority participation in these clinical trials, which is a percentage that's higher than what we see in the general population, and is really very, very good. We're working really hard at it in our AstraZeneca trial at all 5 of our NYU clinics.
Thank you, Dr. Mulligan. And also, Dr. Langford posted a link in the chat for publicly available Pfizer data. So 2 other questions before we kick off that are specific, also from Moderna, to thank you, Dr. Langford. What percentage of participants will receive placebo versus the actual vaccine? And the second question, and I think that this is something that is on everybody's minds, and then I'll hand it over to Dr. Punter to continue this conversation, is why would people volunteer for the phase 3 AstraZeneca trial, which runs for 2 years? And some of the other panelists can also discuss why we follow participants for 2 years, when essential workers might get a vaccine in 6 weeks or so, and the rest of the country by the middle of 2021.
Thank you, Juanita. Those questions are important, and they're sort of related. So the first question, what is the percentage of people in trials that get vaccine versus placebo? In both Pfizer and Moderna, it was 50-50. So it was like a flip of a coin. Actually, the computer would generate the randomization, we call it, which group a particular individual would be in, either vaccine or placebo. And they had a 50% chance of getting the vaccine. We were blinded. We are blinded. They are blinded. It's called a double-blind study, and we don't know until the end of the study or whenever unblinding occurs. For the current AstraZeneca trial, this is actually good news, I think, for people that are thinking about participating. It's a 2/3 chance of vaccine, 1/3 chance of placebo. So a slightly different ratio there, 2 to 1 vaccine to placebo in the current AstraZeneca trial that we are enrolling. And then the last question, why are we still going with other trials? We've got these 2, as I said, home run vaccines. There are many reasons, I believe. There are many good reasons why we need to continue, but I'll give a few. Number 1, Dr. Punter pointed out that we have over 300 million Americans, and on the planet, we have something like 7 billion plus humans. And there's no way there will ever be enough Moderna and Pfizer vaccine to vaccinate either all Americans or all of our global communities. And we do want to think globally as well as locally. So we need many vaccines, all to be successful, to be safe, to be effective. And so the AstraZeneca vaccine is actually quite important. There's another aspect to this, and this has to do with something I know someone's going to ask about tonight, and that is the storage of the vaccines. The RNA vaccines are wonderful, but they actually require, especially the Pfizer vaccine, a super cold freezer, which is not necessarily widely available. On the other hand, the AstraZeneca vaccine, just a plain old refrigerator. It's also cheaper to produce the AstraZeneca vaccine. They can make 3 billion doses in 2021. Pfizer, for example, says they're going to make 1.3 billion doses in 2021. So there are a lot of reasons, if you put on your sort of global hat and even across the US, wanting to have enough vaccine for everyone that wants to take it, why we need this AstraZeneca vaccine. And on the call today with Dr. Fauci, he really made that point. He said, please, you as AstraZeneca investigators, don't think your trial's not important. It is so important for the country and for the world.
And likewise, for my fellow economists and business people on the line, you know, it is really unproductive to have one or two pharmaceutical companies to only have a vaccine available. That will drive the cost up and will be inaccessible to, you know, the communities that we serve, like the low to moderate income communities. So we do need a variety. We need a competitive variety of vaccines, as many as possible, to keep the cost down and the availability, as Dr. Mulligan mentioned, for the 7 billion people on the planet, as it is a pandemic, a worldwide event. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Aisha Langford. Dr. Langford.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aisha Langford. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Medicine at NYU. I'm in the Department of Population Health, and kind of, I guess, in my part of my day job, I study health communication and medical decision making. I also am a co-director of a recruitment and retention core for our Clinical and Translational Science Institute. And I'm also a phase 1 participant actually in the Pfizer trial. And I can talk a little bit more about that as we go on, but I actually signed up for the Pfizer trial before I knew I was going to be on these kind of panels and consulting with the vaccine center. So that was actually pre this. And I wanted to do it for a lot of different reasons, mainly because I was healthy and I could. I, had control over my time so I could go to all the visits. And because I am relatively healthy, I was thinking about, people like my parents who are in their 70s and can't participate, or folks who maybe have a lot of underlying conditions and couldn't participate, and really being able to contribute, I think, at this very important, delicate moment in time. For me, that was like really a privilege to be able to participate and to contribute and really to be a part of history. So that was a motivation for me. And I will say, lastly, when I was at University of Michigan doing my PhD, my dissertation research, ironically, was actually about minority enrollment into clinical trials. So I've been talking literally for over a decade about why it's important for people to be invited, why they should know their options, and why we shouldn't make assumptions about whole groups of people, that people often will are very able to digest information and will consider their options, and oftentimes will participate when they're eligible and actually invited. So happy to talk about that as well.
So is there one thing that in Dr. Mulligan's presentation that you think that the community could benefit from?
Yes, so I would love, so since you've had a very decorated career in immunology and studying viruses and all those kind of things, can you just kind of give other examples of why vaccines themselves are just important? So you talked about smallpox, and I think maybe for a lot of people, public health has actually worked really well, so they don't remember polio and all these other devastating diseases that were preventable. And I think, that's an example of public health working well, but I just think if you could just remind us about why vaccines are so critical and important.
Thank you. Yeah, vaccines have always been recognized as the most effective weapon to fight infectious diseases of public health importance. In fact, at the turn of the millennium in 1999, CDC named vaccines as the most important medical advance of the 20th century. Every year in the US, 4 million babies are born, approximately. We call that a birth cohort. And because of the childhood vaccination program, 40,000 babies that would have died without vaccination are alive every year. So 40,000 babies that would have died are not dying because of the childhood vaccination program. So childhood vaccines are incredibly important. The other thing to say is that vaccines have been so effective, in some ways they've become victims of their own success. You alluded to this, Dr. Langford. Young parents, middle-aged parents, they haven't seen what how measles can kill a child. And so they start thinking that, well, maybe the vaccine is worse than the disease. But the take-home message is that the vaccines are safe, the diseases are really bad, and we have to somehow keep the memory of those alive so that we can continue to protect our populations.
Yeah, and sorry, one other plug, get your flu shot, everybody. Like, it's important. You don't want COVID and the flu at the same time. You don't want the flu ever, and you don't want COVID ever, but my goodness, you don't want them both at the same time. So get your flu shot. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. So our next panelist is Nurse Tamia Davis, who is on the front line. Ms. Davis?
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Tamia Davis. I have been a registered nurse for about 6 years, and recently I finished my master's program on primary adult geriatric care. So it's very ironic that all of this happened. I actually passed my boards, I want to say, in the beginning of March, maybe the week that New York City got shut down, and my unit overnight was converted to a COVID ICU. So I had a firsthand experience of what the population was going to. And not only that, I was an advocate for the families because the families weren't allowed to go in there. So I was the barrier, and I was I was the telephone for these families. So I got a very good sense of that. I also would like to say, doing my my primary care training in my nurse practitioner role, I had a professor who always, the focus was primary prevention, and primary prevention is established with vaccines. And I know that I've seen the very worst that COVID-19 can do to people, and I am a complete advocate of having a vaccine so that you can be that gate to not let people succumb to the worst that COVID-19 has. So in NYU, when COVID kind of got controlled and the rates started to decline, I was offered a position at NYU's vaccine center as a nurse practitioner and also as a sub-I, where I help inform participants. I answer their questions, I take a medical history, perform physical exams, and I enroll them into the study. And I take the skills that I developed as a nurse on the floor, and I am their primary advocate. I can admit that I don't know everything, and when I don't know something, I am the first person to admit it, but I will find somebody who can give you the answer.
Thank you, Nurse Davis. Do you have any sort of comments to Dr. Mulligan's presentation that you want to clarify for the community?
If we could just talk about, I know he said vaccines don't work, the vaccinations do, and that just hones on the message that was drilled in my head from my very first primary care class, that we need the vaccinations and we need to prevent. We need to have primary prevention at the forefront so that we don't even get to the point of you being hospitalized with COVID-19 and all that comes with that.
Yes.
Would you mind, okay, go ahead, Dr. Mulligan, I wanted to ask a follow-up question.
Why don't you go ahead? Dr. Punter, please go ahead. I think that'd be better.
Yeah, I wanted to, Nurse Davis, I really wanted our audience to understand, what the patient is going through when they're inflicted with COVID-19. And I know this is an emotional topic, but what is it like for the patient to be on a respirator? Could you talk about that? Because that's really the bottom line and really communicating, in my opinion, to our community when they're faced with narratives that are based in myths and misinformation. But when you're deathly ill and you're on a respirator, how are these patients? What do these patients need from us as a community that apparently are not relatively healthy? What do we have to do to make sure that those patients don't go through that again and their families?
I would definitely say to be open to a vaccine, but I can speak from the experience. I worked in a COVID ICU, so by the time you got to me, your respiratory status was so severe that you couldn't breathe, and as soon as you got to my unit, you were intubated. So you rolled up to my unit, you were paralyzed, you were sedated, and you were intubated on the spot. As soon as you got on the unit, you had lines placed. Sometimes you were prone. You had a tube or a bag coming out of every opening of your body, and you weren't cognizant of anything happening. And these patients were heavily sedated, and sometimes to protect them from themselves, they had to be manually restrained. It's definitely difficult, but it's something that I got through. It's something that I will never forget. And I'd like to always say that COVID is real. It is real. The stories from the hospital are real. They became our families. Their families became our families. We cried. Some people weren't able to say goodbye to their loved ones. All they got was maybe an iPhone or an iPad that I would have to come in and hold it. And then from a personal experience, I also had a loved one who died in a COVID, in this whole pandemic. And I mean, being a healthcare worker, I just felt completely hopeless. I wasn't able to say goodbye. I was granted a FaceTime with a dead body, and it's really hard to go through. And then when the families were able to come in, they were passing out on the spot because they couldn't take what they were seeing happening to their loved ones.
I'm sorry I had asked that question, but I think it's very real, and we need to know it as a community. Dr. Mulligan?
Well, I thank you, Tamia. That was very moving, and thank you for the service you did during those very difficult months of March and April. And think about it now in New York, it's better, but people unfortunately didn't learn from us like we might have wished in terms of, trying to lock this down. And so people all over are going through what you had to go through out in Wisconsin and all over the country, seeing the same thing over again. And it's just unthinkable. I do want to also just say that Miss Davis is one hell of a nurse. I've been working with her very closely for the last week because one of our other nurses has been out sick, one of our other nurse practitioners, and it just made me proud that she has joined our team. She's so good with our study participants, and she is just an outstanding nurse practitioner. So thank you very much, Tamia.
Thank you.
Thank you. The Honorable Judge Milton Tingling, could you formally introduce yourself?
Thank you, Malcolm. I am Justice Milton Adair Tingling. I'm retired Supreme Court Justice. I am now, having retired, the first and only Black county clerk out of 62 counties and 230 years in the history of New York State. I am also the Commissioner of Jurors, and I'm also a proud colleague of HCCI. First of all, to Dr. Mulligan, I want to thank you. That is the simplest, most direct and succinct explanation that I've heard about COVID-19 vaccines out of everything that I read, and I read every single day. I'm going to ask just up front if there's any way that we could film that 12 minutes that you did and disseminate it to as many organizations and entities as possible. I guarantee you that that presentation will save thousands of lives from people that are afraid, that are apprehensive, and that are opposed to even considering taking a vaccine. 12 years ago, when I was on the bench, I was the judge that shot down Mayor Bloomberg's soda ban law. At the time, the basis of my decision was that it was not a pandemic. Not sugar, diabetes, the attendant and concomitant and the concurring diseases and effects of that obviously are evident. However, the basis of my decision was that from there, you could go and declare bees to be an epidemic. And that I thought was dangerous. I ended up having a meeting with Arthur Kaplan that I'm sure Dr. Mulligan is well versed with at NYU Langone. And I sat down with a panel of physicians and Dr. Kaplan, and they were very adamant about that this was something. And what I said to them was, you sit in a room and discuss it among yourselves, and you agree that this is such a serious problem. But when it comes down to a pandemic that I know, malaria, Spanish flu, polio, measles, there is no question but that we must accept science and follow science and believe in science. And Dr. Mulligan, what I've heard from you tonight has verified and confirmed everything that I thought back then. To our nurse practitioner, Ms. Davis, I honor you. So grateful for you and your service. I have a 98-year-old mother-in-law who is in a nursing home. Quite frankly, the woman is a rock. She got COVID-19, just, brushed it off, walked right through it. But what you were talking about, we have been unable to see her for months. And then when we were able to see her, and what's so difficult is that the visits of family are really what sustains her. Dr. Mulligan, when you gave your presentation tonight, the thing that I honed in on was where it said community is essential. And I tell you this, as somebody who lives a block away in Harlem from where I was born, raised, and grew up. The community is scared. We are afraid, not just of COVID-19, but of the vaccinations, of the cure. What you have done tonight and what this program is doing tonight is something that I'm volunteering to take anywhere and everywhere I go, to let our communities know that there is hope on the horizon, but that we have to be strong. We have to sustain over this period of time. Dr. Mulligan, you said there will be trials going out next month, but it's not going to change everything next month. This is maybe a 5 to 6 month process. Please, please take what you've done tonight and let us disseminate it throughout the community. Thousands of lives will be saved. They may never know your name, but we will know. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Tingle. You always have a very broad perspective that hits on the salient points. Appreciate it. Dr. Victoria Ingo, as I mentioned, is a principal investigator on the Harlem Strong Initiative. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to join us tonight, but her colleague, Deborah Levine, who's a licensed clinical social worker and community member, and has worked tirelessly over the last 30 years in helping folks living with HIV and AIDS, as well as the current healthcare crisis. I'll allow her to introduce herself. Dr. Deborah Levine.
Good evening and thank you. It's an honor and privilege to be a part of this panel. First, I'd like to honor and say thank you to all of our healthcare professionals who go out every day and put their lives on the line and support the rest of us as we go through this process. So thank you very much for all that you do for us and continuing to support this work. As someone since February has lost over 14 people, both friends, families, and colleagues, I understand what that means when people cannot connect with their loved ones and we don't have the opportunity to celebrate their lives in the ways that we are accustomed to. So I just wanted to acknowledge the pain and also to say, even in light of losing Mayor Dinkins, it just reminds me how much he would say things like being forward focused and not past possessed is what we have to help our community move to. It gives me great pleasure to be a part of this panel tonight, and I bring greetings from our Dean, El Mahando, who is very excited about these conversations, and Dr. Ngo, who unfortunately could not join us but asked me to participate. Just to give you a little background, the Harlem Health Initiative is a newly launched program of the City of New York, University of New York, the Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. Our focus and our aim is to improve the health and well-being of the Harlem community by supporting its existing community-based organization. I say that to say that my partnership and our partnership with organizations like HCCI are critical in helping communities better understand their role in clinical trials and other health disparities. And so for me tonight, the big question day out really has to do with options and better understanding, will the public, the questions have been posed to me, will we have an opportunity to decide which vaccine we will be offered? And is it going to be based on insurance, or will the government play a role in deciding which of those vaccines we receive? Those are questions that not only do I hear from community members, but I think those are also questions that I hear from the students that we serve at the School of Public Health.
Thank you, Deborah. Dr. Mulligan, do you want to handle some of those questions?
Sure, I'll try. Thank you very much, Ms. Levine. The US government has, for example, with Pfizer, spent $1.95 billion to purchase 1 billion doses. So it's $19.50 a dose. And the government has indicated the vaccine will be free. And I believe that's for all of the vaccines that they purchase. They've made a commitment. So that's one thing. So it will not depend on insurance, to answer that part. And then initially, it's going to be a phased approach. At first, the supply will be quite limiting. Both Pfizer and Moderna together, by the end of this year, there'll be enough doses for 22.5 million Americans. That's 7% of our population of over 300 million. So you can see right away there won't be nearly enough. And so that's why CDC will come out with recommendations on doing the, getting the most bang for the buck, doing the most good we possibly can. Who needs the vaccine most? And so initially the vaccine supply will be limited, but for those who get it, it'll be free. Eventually, when the supply is wider, I think, yes, people would have a choice of which vaccine. It may depend a little bit on their local environment, what's available through their state and so forth. But I think choice is something we always want to be there. Dr. Punter alluded to the importance of choice. Eventually, probably the vaccines later would be on the market. We may be vaccinating against this for several years to come. But to get through this first phase of time, I think through 2020 and even the first half of 2021, supply will be somewhat limited. By the second half of 2021, the supply should be broader, and we may be able to get to, say, healthy 40-year-olds, who don't have one of the other characteristics that would make CDC recommend them getting the vaccine at the front of the line. But eventually, by the end of 2021, I think there would be enough based on projections that I've seen.
Just one follow-up question, and that is if individuals have other chronic diseases, how does being part of a clinical trial impact, or is that is there an opportunity for to have multiple chronic diseases to participate in the clinical trial?
Yes, there is. Because we know that COVID more severely impacts people with chronic conditions like diabetes, heart conditions, kidney, lung conditions. We actually are looking to enroll people with chronic conditions because we want to be sure that those most severely affected can be protected. We do need them to have their chronic conditions be somewhat stable for the last 2 to 3 months, because we couldn't enroll somebody that was medically unstable in a research trial. But we have many people, probably, I'd say 50% almost of the people we're enrolling in our trials have a chronic condition. And particularly older adults, we are seeing that.
Just to piggyback on what you mean by older adults, because there's a lot of different ways you can define that. So I think for the purposes of some of the trials we're enrolling in, we are open to everyone, but I think specifically encouraging folks that are 65 and older, just so age or advanced age does not preclude you, because we need to know how these vaccines work really across the lifespan, and in particular the folks who are at greater risk for contracting it.
So I'm sorry, this is Judge Tingling. I have a question. How did you and Dr. Mulligan get a hold of my medical charts? Because you just described me, damn it. Okay. I'm going to, I will be in contact with you, because I think it's very important that actually if I was a candidate, that I would be able to speak directly and individually to so many members of my community that are apprehensive about moving forward. So again, I want to thank both of you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I have Dr. Punter, may I ask a question,
Yes,
please?
Yes, absolutely.
Related to the one that was just asked, that's why I mention it now. Are there, Dr. Mulligan, are there some vaccines that are going to be more effective, or are the trials finding out that some may be more effective based upon the condition or the group that they're going to be administered to? Or are they going to be all the same effectiveness on all people?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Dawson. We're learning as we go, of course. The trials are continuing, but what we have seen with the available data so far is quite remarkable, in that older adults, those 65 and older, have very strong responses to these vaccines, the RNA, the AstraZeneca, and they provide a level of protection that is just the same as in the younger adults. That's quite remarkable, and this is not true for many of our vaccines, like the flu vaccine. I think this genetic immunization platform, where you're providing the message, either RNA or the recombinant common cold virus, and you message the cell to make the vaccine spike protein, is particularly good in older adults. The other thing I'd say here is that older adults seem to be tolerating these vaccines very well. In fact, better than younger adults, just in terms of the sort of minor nuisance side effects that every vaccine can cause and that we expect. In fact, I tell my patients, it's a good thing if you have a little sore arm and maybe you feel a little funny for a day or so after your vaccine. It means your body is recognizing and responding like we want. But actually, it turns out with these vaccines, some of them in the older adults, there's even less of that, suggesting that older adults will tolerate these vaccines very, very well.
So thank you for that. Thank you, panelists. I want to get to the attendees' questions. They're posted in the Q&A section. And And the first one from an anonymous attendee: are the vaccine protection numbers protections against disease or protection against severe disease or infection?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. And the answer is that the reported protection levels for Pfizer, for Moderna, and now for AstraZeneca are all against COVID-19 disease, which has been confirmed with a laboratory test. So it's laboratory confirmed COVID-19 disease of any severity.
Okay, another anonymous attendee: is the AZ vaccine trial at NYU using a half dose followed by a full dose or 2 full doses? So that's a dosing question.
Yes. This question alludes to the news that came out yesterday morning at 6 o'clock about the AstraZeneca vaccine. And well, the answer to the question is we're using 2 full doses. What was reported, interestingly, and we didn't know about this when we started our trial, was that in the UK study, remember that the news yesterday was about a trial in Brazil and a trial in the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom trial, there were some participants who got a lower dose for their first shot, and then they got the full dose for their second shot. And they appeared to have a higher level of protection. 90% was reported. So this is actually interesting. It needs to be followed up on, but it's still quite preliminary. Remember, we just have the press release. We don't know a lot about the details of that trial. So for now, there's no plan to change the study at NYU or that we're part of nationally for AstraZeneca. We will continue with the 2 full doses, and we'll hope to learn more about that result in UK.
Another question: what percentage of participants will receive placebo versus the vaccine in the trial? You might have addressed it already, but that's a question that was posted.
Sure. Just as a reminder, in the current trial that we're recruiting at NYU, it's a 2-to-1 randomization. So out of 3 people that go into the trial, 2 get vaccine, 1 get the placebo. In the earlier Pfizer and Moderna trials, it was a 50-50 randomization. 50% got vaccine, 50% placebo. So you actually have a higher chance of getting real vaccine in the AstraZeneca trial. 2/3 of people will get the real vaccine.
Great, thank you.
Malcolm, this is
Yeah.
Judge Tingling. I know we have some questions. Can Dr. Mulliken just give a quick explanation of the difference between testing for the virus and the antibodies test?
Sure. So the virus is the swab of the nose, and there we look for the RNA. This is an RNA virus. It's the genetic code of the virus. We humans, our genetic code is DNA. This happens to be RNA, this particular virus. And that can be picked up on the swab, and then it goes in the lab. We do that test in my lab, and that measures and tells you if the virus is there or not. There's another kind of swab test, and some of these can be done on saliva as well, by the way, and that's the antigen test. That measures a viral protein. That's often called now the rapid test.
Yeah.
It's not quite as sensitive. It's not quite as accurate, but it's cheaper, it's quicker. That's why it's called rapid, and it could be used in certain circumstances. And then finally, Justice Tingling, there's the antibody test. This is a blood test, and it's not measuring viral RNA or viral antigen or protein, but it measures the body's response, the antibodies that we make, the little proteins that our immune system makes to fight off the virus. If your immune system has never seen the virus, you don't have antibodies against it. But if you've been vaccinated or infected in the past, you will have antibodies. In most cases, almost all cases, you'll have antibodies measured in that blood test.
Beautiful. Thanks, Doc.
You're welcome.
So Lisa asked, why would people volunteer for the AstraZeneca trial that runs 2 years when we recently got news that vaccines from the 2 other sponsors may be available in 6 weeks. I think you addressed it, but it's posted. Would you like to review it again?
Oh, and
Absolutely.
can I interrupt for just a second? There are also in the chat, there's several questions about why AstraZeneca lasts 2 years. So I think this is also a good question, not only for Dr. Mulligan in terms of design, but also for Dr. Langford as a trial participant on another trial that lasts for 2 years, and also for Tamia, who provides nursing and research services over the course of the full 2 years on many different types of trials.
So maybe I'll take the first part and then let Tamia and Dr. Langford talk about the trial duration and what's going on for 2 years. Why would that be? What I'd like to say is that, as we've alluded to a bit, I think, that first of all, the RNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, supply is going to be very limited. By the end of this year, there'll only be 22.5 million, enough doses for 22.5 million Americans. And that's only 7% of our population. So being in a trial could be a way to get a vaccine sooner rather than later. Now, there is a chance of placebo, of course, and so that's part of the deal. I will say that these trials are going to adapt to the changing situation that we're in. Once there is an approved vaccine, anyone who's in a trial, of course, can get that vaccine if they're able to locate it and get it, if they meet the criteria and they can get vaccinated, and that's fine. Clinical trial participants maintain their full freedom, their full ability of choice. They can drop out of the trial anytime, no questions asked. Or what we would hope is if a trial participant decides they do want to go get an approved vaccine that they're able to qualify for, that they would let us know and let us continue to follow them in the study for safety reasons at least. So there are reasons to participate. One might be to have access to a vaccine sooner. Not everybody's going to be able to get it initially. And then there's that altruistic reason that we talked about, which is that we actually need several winning vaccines, and we have a long way to go to discover several more beyond these first two. Dr. Langford and Tamia, would you like to comment about the study duration?
Sure. So I will also say I did join the trial for altruistic purposes to help mankind, but I also was like, well, if there's going to be a vaccine, I want to be one of the first people to get it. So that's, I guess I won't get granted sainthood for saying that, but that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do it. I think did kind of the online request to be considered around early May, and I think I had my first visit or screening in June, and I want to say I had my first shot or so in July, like around the middle of the summer. And so the dosing itself of the vaccine or placebo, because I technically don't know, although I have my inclinations of which one I got, that happened all in the summer. And so all of the other visits, even though it's 2 years, I think I've had 8 visits so far. Everything else moving forward is really just follow-up, blood work, seeing how I'm doing, checking my immune response, but I'm not getting any more active shots. I do have an app on my phone. So during the summer, during the first and second shot, I think daily or something, I had to just, they had to confirm, that I was feeling okay, I was still alive, any symptoms. So I was doing an app on my phone. And now I still have the same app, and I think I check in like once a week to see, what my general kind of symptoms are. But now it's just really going to be, I think, the visits will be every few months. They're a lot more spaced out, and it's really just to kind of make sure people are well and staying well over time, but not active vaccine. So that's it. I don't know if Tamia needs to say anything.
Yes, and then to piggyback off of what both of the previous panelists said, they want to study the participants through the 2 years, because a big question is, how long am I protected for? Mm-hmm. So we need to follow just to know if we need a booster. Is it like every year, like a flu shot? Is it a tetanus? I'm getting it every 10 years. So that's why the studies last for 2 years. We need to know if we need to be revaccinated and how often.
Right. And I will kind of give definitely a shout out to all the nurses that are part of the trial. So for folks who are considering participating in a clinical trial for this vaccine, or maybe a trial for something else, it could be a trial for diabetes or cancer or whatever, there's always an informed consent process. So typically, most of the time, you'll get an actual document that's several pages long. You should read it, all of it, and ask questions. And the nurse or whoever is consenting you, whatever, it might be a physician consenting you, but all the questions that you have, it's a wonderful time to ask, but then they'll go over all the procedures. So for example, literally like every visit I go to, I'm actually getting a physical exam by a clinician. So mostly always a doctor, but I'm also giving blood work. So I think what Tamia was saying was that kind of they want to see the duration of like how you're responding. And so literally every time I give blood work, and maybe Dr. Mulligan can share, I don't know, all the things that they're looking at in that blood work, but I think part of that is like your immune response. And they want to know with all of these different vaccines, like, is the duration of your immunity, is that 6 months, is it a year? For future kind of years, how often will people have to come back? Is it like, I don't know, is it tetanus shot that's like once every 10, there's different intervals for vaccines, whereas like the flu shot is every year, other things it might be every 10 years or whatever. And I think that's part of the reason why people like me are giving blood work literally at every visit, so that they can kind of understand at the blood level and immune response level kind of how these vaccines are working. And that'll give information kind of in future years, in future iterations. I don't know if that was a poor explanation of like immune response, but I think that's what you all are doing.
I thought it was great. Good job.
Thanks.
Great. So I guess then the big question is that people have been asking, if they enroll in the clinical trials and a vaccine does become commercially available, will they be unblinded so that they know whether or not they received it? And two, is it safe to receive one of the other vaccines if they're in part of one clinical trial? And three, sorry, you can remember all this, I'm trying to squeeze it all in. If you've tested positive for COVID-19 and you have antibodies, is it safe to get one of the vaccines?
Yeah. All right. Maybe I'll take those in reverse order. Yes, we have several people that have participated in trials. For example, the phase 1 trial for AstraZeneca, who had previously been infected and were vaccinated, and the vaccine was equally safe in them. I don't anticipate, based on my opinion and general knowledge, that there would be a problem. And in fact, we don't screen for prior infection in the phase 3 trials. So of the 75,000 people that have gotten Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, there probably were 1,000 that had previously had COVID, and they've all done just fine. In fact, it may result in a stronger immune response because you'll have been primed by the natural infection and boosted with the vaccine. Okay, so then working backwards. Help me, sorry. It's been a long day.
Okay. So if you are enrolled in a clinical trial and you did receive a research vaccine, and one of the other ones become commercially available, is that safe to get?
Yeah. So that's actually an unknown because to my knowledge, there's nobody that's done that. But again, my informed opinion would be that it's likely to be just fine. We know, for example, with the pediatric vaccination schedules, maybe the parents move and the child needs to get their booster shot to go with their priming, let's say, meningitis vaccine. And there are different companies. They might get at different companies. And there's generally not there's no problem with that. So I think it would probably be fine. But it is an unknown, but I think it would be fine. And the first one again?
Will people be unblinded if they're in a clinical trial?
Yeah. So this is one that I'm very comfortable answering. I've heard this from all the sponsors and all of the companies, the manufacturers. They want to do the right thing once a vaccine is approved for their placebo participants. They know how important it is for the clinical trial to have the placebo group. You can't know if a vaccine is working if you don't have a control or placebo group. So those people should be, and I believe will be, first in line once there's an approved vaccine to be able to access that, particularly if it's a vaccine in the trial they're in. And what would probably happen would be either a crossover design where everybody would end up getting vaccine, or all the people in the placebo group would be moved to the vaccine group. If it's another company's vaccine, let's say what might happen for our current NYU enrollees, they're getting the AstraZeneca vaccine, let's say Pfizer, which has submitted to the FDA, it's going to be reviewed December 10th. Let's say there's an EUA approval from FDA in mid-December. Well, we're not going to be able to offer that vaccine in the AstraZeneca trial because we won't have access to it. All of the doses will be given from the federal government to the states and then distributed throughout the state according to state policy. And if an individual, though, is able to get that vaccine, they have one of the conditions that's recommended and they're in a location where the vaccine is available, that is absolutely fine. Like I said, no one in our trials will be denied the ability to get a vaccine if they can qualify for it and get it.
Dr. Mulligan, if the community is interested in exploring whether they are suitable for the stage 3 trials at NYU, what should they do?
Yes, so we have, and we can provide this, I think someone may have put it in the chat, but maybe we can do it again. There's a link to our website, and that website has what we call registry, and it's a place to go in to put your contact information, to indicate that yes, indeed, you are interested to learn more, and to give us a few details about your potential to meet the criteria to be in the study, which would include people that have higher than average risk. For example, being a grocery store worker. We also want to know if people are willing to provide it. They don't have to. Racial and ethnic minority status, because we know those are people that we particularly want to be inclusive of in our trials. Once that information comes to us through the website, then we would reach out to the individual and go through some further questions. And if everything seemed good, and if the individual, after talking with one of my recruiters on the phone, was still interested, we would invite them into one of our 5 clinics around the city to have an in-clinic visit.
Thank you for that. Reverend Al Taylor, our assemblyman from the 71st District, is actually on the line, and I don't know if he can give greetings and talk about how important he believes this effort is. Reverend Taylor, Assemblyman Taylor.
Hey, good evening, everyone. For the last couple of days, and PPEs to get folks to mask up. I guess the first question is to those that would be willing to participate in exploratory medicine. There's a reluctance for people of color to want to engage, but more importantly, the vaccine is readily available. How do we get people to participate in the because it only works when you take it.
Were you able to hear Assemblyman Taylor?
We can't hear him. He's very low.
Well, you weren't able to hear him? Well, what Assemblyman Taylor asked is, what is our strategy to educate the community to make the decision to accept the vaccine And I think, Assemblyman Taylor, our strategy is to educate everyone, bring the most accurate, truthful information to bear, which we're doing now in the form of a series of panel discussions. We had one in the month of October. This is our November. We plan to have one every month until June to make sure that we educate our constituents and our residents appropriately. So really education, 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 and access to healthcare in the form of the debate in clinical trials is the step that we're taking. And I think through that effort and with community organizations like ACCI, elected officials, organizational and community advocates, and the experts in the scientific community, if we work together, then we can get as many people as humanly possible to get educated and vaccinated and protected from this horrible pandemic disease.
Thank you.
Dr. Punter, it's
Dr. Dawson, would you?
yes.
Would you?
I wanted to just,
We have about 2 minutes. Could you?
right. Yeah, I just wanted to thank
Summarize and
everybody.
close us out.
I want to thank everybody, especially I'd like to thank Dr. Mulligan for a wonderful presentation. Thank you again, and all of the panelists. And a special thanks goes out to you, Dr. Punter, for helping to get this organized so that it goes so smoothly. I did attempt to post in the notes how you can get additional information. I hope it came through. And I think that's about it. Thanks to everybody. Have a great Thanksgiving, and be blessed until we see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all, Dr. Mulligan, Juanita, Ms. Davis, Dr. Langford, Deborah Levine, Judge Tingling, and Alfred Taylor, and all of the community members. This is important, and this is really about protecting you. Thank you very much on behalf of ACCI and our board of directors.
And I'd also like to possibly, Dr. Punter, let's just also thank those people who called in. You are a special part of this group, and so we thank you for your questions. Thank you, and we hope that you've learned something meaningful from this.